Khabib Nurmagomedov absolutely humiliated drug addict, alcoholic, sexual predator Conor McGregor after Conor McGregor accused him of scamming his fans by selling an NFT that a lot of people bought based on exactly what it was advertised as.
Khabib Nurmagomedov just responded to Conor McGregor's accusations with what might be the most savage clapback in the entire history of MMA. In a brilliant move, he invited his bitter rival to a rehabilitation center over in Dagestan. But what's really fascinating is that buried deep within Khabib's response was something that nobody saw coming, a hint that we've all been desperately waiting for. This is the story of the resurrection and the reckoning.
There is no way good guy Khabib used his late father's name as well as Dagestani culture to scam his fans and fire sell a bunch of digital NFTs online and then delete all of the content after they were sold, leaving his fans robbed of their money. There is no way a good guy do this.
The date is November 27th, 225. And the entire combat sports world has been completely consumed by a firestorm of truly unimaginable proportions. We're talking about a massive conflagration that didn't even begin in the octagon, where these two legendary warriors once faced off in what still stands as the highest-grossing pay-per-view event in UFC history. No, this new battle erupted in the digital arena of social media, a place where sharp words can cut deeper than any elbow strike and where public accusations can wound far more permanently than any submission hold could ever hope to. It all started with Conor McGregor, the now 37-year-old Irish phenomenon, who once stood at the absolute pinnacle of the mixed martial arts universe as its undisputed king. He had mysteriously vanished from the social media platform X around early October 2025, right after hyping yet another UFC return.
Let's be honest, the main reason there are so many anti-Muslim MMA fans is because Khabib brutalized McGregor back in 2018. The casual incels were devastated watching McGregor have his soul taken that night and simply never recovered.
His departure from the platform was bizarrely quiet. It came without any fanfare, with zero explanation, and completely lacked the theatrical flourish that had defined virtually every single moment of his controversial and spectacular career. One day, he was right there, hurling insults at his enemies, both the real ones and the ones he imagined, constantly threatening comebacks that never seemed to actually materialize. And then, just like that, the next day he was simply gone, vanished like a puff of smoke in the wind. Naturally, observers all throughout the mixed martial arts community began to speculate wildly about the reasons for his sudden and uncharacteristic disappearance.
My count is 56 former drug addicts at my rehabilitation center in Dagestan that I treated. Come to Dagestan, act Notorious MMA. They'll take care of you here. Mexico didn't help you as far as I can see.
Some people suggested that his accumulating legal troubles had finally caught up with him in a way that demanded absolute and total silence. Others started whispering about potential health concerns, both physical and psychological, hinting that the immense toll that years of brutal combat and relentless controversy had extracted from his body and his mind had reached a point where it could no longer be concealed from the public view.
Conor he's kind of an embarrassment to his family. And I do believe Conor has a disease, but I do also believe that Conor is a complete piece of shit. And Khabib should say this. And Khabib did open some drug rehabilitation centers in Dagestan.
But the truth, when it finally clawed its way into the light on November 23, 2025, proved to be far stranger than any fiction anyone could have dreamed up. McGregor suddenly resurfaced, proclaiming that he'd had a psychedelic rebirth. He described a mind-bending 36-hour hallucinogenic therapy session down in Mexico, where he claims he saw vivid visions of his own death, personally met Jesus, and got saved. All during this extraordinary experience designed to heal what he only vaguely described as trauma.
If you want to go back to some of the crypto incidents that Khabib was related in, I guess you should talk about what Conor did. Because if we're conflating the two things, selling an NFT exactly as advertised, and we're conflating that with a crypto scam, let's not forget. Let's not forget, okay? Because Conor, and we're not going to go through all this, Conor hyped up a crypto coin, and then he rug pulled that crypto coin.
What specific trauma he was trying to address remained completely undefined, though any observer could easily put together a comprehensive list of likely candidates. there were the legal woes that had been mounting with disturbing regularity. The nagging injuries that had plagued every single one of his attempts at a competitive comeback, the devastating 1-3 record he had compiled since his legendary, history-making victory over Eddie Alvarez, and, of course, the civil assault liability verdict that had deeply stained his reputation, a verdict that he famously lost on appeal back in July.
Khabib took Conor's soul years ago, and the fans have never recovered, and they hate Muslim fighters because of it. And I will continue to call it out. I don't care.
Now, he proclaimed to the entire world, with his characteristic, unshakable bravado, that he was transformed beyond all recognition. He was back, he was jacked, and he was actively preparing for a glorious, triumphant return to the UFC sometime in late. Almost immediately, training videos began to appear all over his social media, showcasing a physique that strongly suggested he'd spent countless hours in the gymnasium. He then teased a new interview series he was launching with the ex-Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill, the very man who killed Osama bin Laden, which was set to take place at McGregor's own Black Forge Inn pub. And just to top it all off, he also sued Sky News for defamation over some unflattering comments a reporter had made about his civil verdict.
And luckily, Khabib called it out. He acknowledged it, and he embarrassed Conor McGregor for being the low-life piece of that he is. But it's just sad to me. A lot of fans co-sign this. It's sad to me that you got content creators saying, oh, it's definitely a scam.
But if Conor McGregor had genuinely hoped that his newfound spiritual awakening would somehow mark a clean break from all of his past controversies, he was about to be rudely and powerfully reminded that some rivalries never truly end, and, more importantly, some enemies never, ever truly forgive. On November 25th, 2025, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the retired, undefeated Eagle from Dagestan, who had inflicted upon McGregor what was perhaps the single most humiliating defeat of his entire career, launched his Papaka NFTs on the Telegram messaging platform. These were unique, digital versions of the traditional Dagestani hat that Khabib had worn with such visible and immense pride during his fighting days. Each one was signed and explicitly, deeply connected to the legacy of his late father, the legendary Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. The elder Nurmagomedov had tragically passed away back in July 2020 from complications related to COVID-19, a devastating loss that had directly prompted Khabib's retirement right at the absolute peak of his powers. It was a decision that stunned the entire fighting world, but also powerfully demonstrated the incredible depth of his commitment to his family above all else. You have to understand, the Papaka itself carries a profound and deep cultural significance in Dagestan. It is not merely a hat. It is a powerful symbol of honor, of tradition, and of masculine pride that has been proudly worn by generations of mountain warriors. For Khabib to digitize this sacred symbol as an NFT represented a genuine etch to share his cultural heritage with his fans all across the world, while at the same time building a business venture that could help support his various and extensive philanthropic initiatives. The NFTs sold out within just a few hours of their launch, reportedly generating approximately $4.4 million in revenue. By virtually any reasonable standard, it was an incredibly successful business venture that cleverly combined a rich cultural heritage with emerging blockchain technology. The people who purchased them received exactly what was advertised: unique digital collectibles that were directly tied to one of the most successful and beloved fighters in the entire history of the UFC. But Conor McGregor, he saw something very, very different. He saw an opportunity to strike at his most hated rival, a chance to question his integrity on a global public stage, and an opening to drag his name and his family's honor through the mud. On November 26, 2025, McGregor launched his brutal assault with his typical reckless aggression. His initial post, which was later deleted as has become his characteristic pattern, contained accusations that would have seemed absolutely outrageous coming from anyone else, but seemed almost predictable coming from the man who had already spent years attacking Khabib's religion, his family, and his entire cultural identity. McGregor brazenly claimed that Khabib had used his late father's name to scam his own fans by fire-selling NFTs and then deleting the promotional content immediately afterward. This accusation was as inflammatory and explosive as it was completely and utterly without any factual merit. What Conor McGregor tried to characterize as deleting evidence was, in reality, just the standard post-sale procedure that any online business follows. The original promotional link had been removed from the channel following the successful sellout of the NFTs and was simply replaced with a thank you message to all the supporters. The partner of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov even later confirmed this exact explanation publicly, but the damage, if that was indeed McGregor's dark intent, had already begun to spread like wildfire across the internet. Anti-Muslim elements within the MMA fanbase, a toxic contingent that had existed ever since Khabib's dominant, crushing victory over McGregor at UFC 209. Immediately seized upon the baseless accusations with a disturbing and predictable enthusiasm. Khabib Nurmagomedov is not a man who suffers insults in silence, and let's be honest, he never has been. Now at 36 years of age, holding a perfect 29-0 professional record and with absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone in the fighting world, he certainly was not about to start letting things slide, especially not when his family's sacred legacy was being attacked so viciously. His response came swiftly and with a kind of savage, surgical precision that was chilling to witness. "You absolute liar," he wrote. "You will always try to darken my name after you got destroyed that night, but you will never achieve that." He even repeated it for emphasis. "To absolute liar, you will always try to darken my name after you got destroyed that night, but you will never achieve that." Then came the line that cut to the core of their entire dynamic. "Yes, good guys, don't do that. This is 100% fact." That phrase, "that night," needed absolutely no further explanation. Every single person in the combat sports world knew exactly which night Khabib was referencing. October 6, 2018, UFC 209 at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The night that generated an astronomical 2.4 million pay-per-view buys, which at the time was the highest total in UFC history. The night that ended with Conor McGregor tapping frantically to a brutal neck crank at 3 minutes and 3 seconds of the fourth. The night that devolved into an infamous post-fight riot when Khabib leaped over the cage to attack McGregor's cornerman, Dylan Dennis. The night that resulted in Khabib being fined $500,000 and suspended for 9 months. It was the night that broke something fundamental deep inside Conor McGregor. Something that is clearly never fully healed. Khabib then continued, defending his NFT project with his characteristic, unwavering directness. Good guys don't do that. They don't create exclusive digital gifts with real-time value that you can share with your friends and family. Gifts in the shape of papaka hats that symbolize tradition and culture of Dagestan people. Of course, McGregor only doubled down with increasing ferocity, calling Khabib a low IQ troglodyte and demanding an apology for robbing fans. He continued to invoke Khabib's deceased father in terms that many observers found utterly repugnant, a disgusting pattern that had characterized his attacks ever since the lead-up to UFC 209, when he had similarly targeted Abdulmanap with crude, vile remarks designed specifically to provoke an emotional response from his son. The irony was not lost on anyone who remembered what that October night had actually produced. McGregor had talked about fathers back then too. He had made crude jokes about Khabib's family. He had mocked everything the Dagestani held sacred, and then he had been systematically and brutally dismantled over 4 rounds before desperately tapping out to escape a neck crank that threatened to put him to sleep. Or worse. The deep psychological trauma of that soul-crushing defeat had clearly never healed, and now, a full 7 years later, McGregor was still pathetically reaching for the very same weapons that had failed him so spectacularly before. This led to the Rehabilitation Invitation, a masterstroke on the digital battlefield. Khabib Nurmagomedov's next move demonstrated precisely why he had dominated Conor McGregor so completely in their single meeting inside the octagon. It wasn't just through physical superiority, but through a level of psychological composure that his Irish rival simply could not match. Rather than continuing to exchange petty accusations about NFTs and business practices on the same low level where McGregor seemed determined to operate, Khabib pivoted with surgical precision to a subject that cut directly to the heart of McGregor's well-documented personal struggle. "My count is 56 former drug addicts at my rehabilitation center in Dagestani that I treated," Khabib wrote, referencing the incredible philanthropic work he had undertaken since retiring. Come to Dagestani, all the notorious MMA, they'll take care of you here. Mexico didn't help you as far as I can see. The reference was absolutely unmistakable and incredibly savage. Conor McGregor had just finished publicly documenting his psychedelic therapy journey down in Mexico, framing it as some kind of triumphant spiritual awakening. Khabib was suggesting, with his characteristic brutal directness, that whatever healing McGregor believed he had achieved was nothing more than a complete illusion. He was implying that the fundamental problems plaguing the Irishman's life remained as acute as they had ever been, and that perhaps what he truly needed was serious, professional addiction treatment rather than a series of hallucinogenic visions in the desert. That single post absolutely exploded, accumulating over 11 million views and becoming one of the most engaged pieces of content in the entire history of their long-running bitter feud. Fans all across social media responded with a mixture of pure awe at Khabib's ice-cold composure and a dark sense of amusement at the surgical precision with which he had so effectively targeted McGregor's deepest and most public vulnerability. The absolute genius of Khabib's response really lay in its powerful subtext. While Conor McGregor was busy screaming accusations about Khabib exploiting his father's legacy, Khabib was quietly and effectively demonstrating what he had actually done with his post-fighting career. He was building rehabilitation centers to help recovering addicts. He was coaching the next generation of fighters through his world-class Eagles MMA gym. In fact, he was scheduled to corner Islam Makhachev at UFC 311 in January 2026 for his fight against Arman Tsarukyan. He had even recently gone viral for a gym clash with the popular streamer Adin Ross in early November. His life, you see, had moved forward in productive, meaningful directions. McGregor, by stark contrast, was still fighting battles from 2018 as if the intervening 7 years had never even happened. And McGregor's response just proved how deeply Khabib's psychological warfare had found its target. "And who will I be meeting there?" he spat back. "Because it won't be you. You can't scam me with your lies. You tax-dodging scammer on the run. Your poor family. I pray for your constant lies. I pray. While you lie, you should just be honest, because Allah knows all." The invocation of Allah in McGregor's response struck many observers as particularly revealing and desperate. Throughout their entire rivalry, McGregor had repeatedly attempted to weaponize Khabib's Muslim faith against him, making derogatory comments about his religion and culture in ways that crossed lines most professional athletes would never even dream of approaching. Now, even in what was supposedly a dispute about NFT sales, he was once again reaching for religious provocation as his primary tool of attack. But what made McGregor's accusations about NFT scamming particularly and laughably hypocritical was his own well-documented history with cryptocurrency promotion. Back in 2024, McGregor had launched his very own meme coin called Real, which raised approximately $30,92,000 from investors before essentially collapsing in value, leaving those who had trusted his celebrity endorsement holding completely worthless digital tokens. Crypto investigators like ZachXBT had already pointed out this staggering irony, noting that McGregor had conveniently deleted his own posts related to his failed cryptocurrency venture right after its spectacular implosion. Post-fight years have been incredibly kind to Khabib and exceptionally cruel to McGregor. Khabib went on to defeat Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje in dominant fashion before retiring at a perfect 29-0 after his father's death. It was a promise kept to his grieving mother, who had already lost her husband and could not bear to watch her son risk his life in combat any longer. He built Eagles MMA into a veritable factory of Dagestani talent, with Islam Makhachev now holding the lightweight title that Khabib had once possessed, and Umar Nurmagomedov emerging as a serious bantamweight contender who carries forward the family legacy. The suggestion that UFC 209 had inflicted permanent psychological damage on McGregor was not new. It had circulated in various forms for years, but Makhachev's blunt assessment articulated it more directly than anyone within Khabib's inner circle ever had before. If anyone understood what that night had truly done to Conor McGregor, it was the man who had watched Khabib prepare for it with such meticulous attention to detail, and then watched him celebrate afterward with a look of profound and deep satisfaction. As November 27, 2025, drew to a close, the scorecard for this latest round of the eternal McGregor-Khabib conflict seemed crystal clear to most observers. Khabib had emerged from the exchange with his reputation enhanced, his composure masterfully demonstrated, and his important philanthropic work highlighted for the world to see. McGregor, on the other hand, had once again revealed himself as a man completely consumed by bitterness over a defeat that he can neither accept nor transcend. A man willing to attack a grieving son over his father's legacy, willing to make wild accusations without any factual basis, and willing to invoke religious provocation when all other ammunition had been completely exhausted. Throughout this entire exchange, Dana White and the UFC apparatus had been curiously and uncharacteristically quiet, perhaps recognizing that this particular fire needed absolutely no additional fuel. The promotional value of a Khabib-McGregor rematch remained, in theory, absolutely astronomical. It would undoubtedly shatter pay-per-view records and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, but the practical obstacles were simply insurmountable. White had previously called their rivalry the ugliest feud ever, recognizing both its immense promotional value and its genuine, undeniable toxicity. In the days following the exchange, McGregor continued posting prayers and faith emojis, perhaps seeking a spiritual equilibrium that has eluded him ever since that fateful night on October 6, 2018. Khabib, characteristically, moved. He started posting submission clips from UFC 209 on his Instagram stories, sending the implicit message that McGregor remained living rent-free inside his head, all while preparing to corner Makhachev at UFC 30. The rematch, officially, will never happen. Khabib has been perfectly clear about this on numerous occasions. His mother's wishes are paramount and completely non-negotiable. His competitive legacy is already perfect, unblemished by the defeats and controversies that plague his most famous opponent. But the war of words, the endless, exhausting cycle of accusation and response, of deletion and resurrection, of old wounds picked open and salt rubbed in, that will continue for as long as both men draw breath and have access to social media platforms. It is, in its own way, the only rematch either of them will ever get, an endless verbal sparring match that neither can truly win, because the decisive result was already rendered 7 years ago inside the T-Mobile Arena. For the millions of fans who have watched this rivalry unfold across nearly a decade, the NFT controversy of November 2025 was simply the latest chapter in a story that seems destined to never, ever end. The hatred between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor transcended sport, it transcended business, it transcended even the personal grievances that had accumulated over years of bitter conflict. It had become something almost mythological, a clash of civilizations, of philosophies, of fundamentally incompatible worldviews embodied in two men who could not and would not find peace with each other. Khabib represented tradition, family, faith, and the slow, steady construction of a legacy through hard work and humility. McGregor represented flash, bravado, individualism, and the seductive but ultimately destructive belief that charisma and talent could overcome any obstacle, including one's own worst impulses. Their fight had not merely determined who was the better mixed martial artist on one particular night. It had, in the minds of many observers, rendered a final verdict on which approach to life produces better results in the long run. And perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all. Conor McGregor had built his legendary career on getting inside his opponents' heads, on defeating them psychologically before the first punch was ever thrown. Khabib Nurmagomedov had proven utterly immune to these tactics, had absorbed every insult and provocation without ever losing his composure, and had delivered his response not through words, but through 4 rounds of utter dominance, followed by a submission that still haunts McGregor to this very day. 7 years later, McGregor is still desperately trying to win a war he already lost, and Khabib is still refusing to let him forget it. The fans will continue to debate who was right and who was wrong in the NFT controversy. The analysts will continue to dissect what happened at UFC 209 and what it meant for both men's legacies. The memes will continue to proliferate across social media. Khabib vs. Conor 2 NFT edition. Khabib snatched Conor's soul, now his wallet. The discourse will remain chaotic, inflammatory, and utterly irresistible to anyone with even a passing interest in combat sports drama. But the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Khabib Nurmagomedov defeated Conor McGregor in the most complete and humiliating fashion imaginable. And nothing that happened on social media, not NFT controversies, not rehabilitation invitations, not accusations of scamming or counter-accusations of substance abuse, will ever change that reality. The eagle has flown, the notorious has fallen, and 7 years later, neither man can escape the immense gravity of what happened between them. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the other cards on the screen. The distinction between what Khabib had done and what McGregor was now accusing him of doing was absolutely fundamental, and you need to understand this. Khabib had advertised a specific product, a digital collectible in the form of a traditional Dagestani hat, and he had delivered exactly that product to every single person who purchased it. Nobody was deceived about what they were buying. A rug pull scam, by contrast, involves deliberately creating a worthless asset, artificially inflating its value through a massive celebrity endorsement, and then selling one's own holdings at the absolute peak while leaving all the retail investors to absorb catastrophic, life-altering losses. This was precisely what McGregor himself had done with his real coin, and precisely what he was now shamelessly attempting to accuse Khabib of doing, with a product that operated on entirely different principles. The hypocrisy was just staggering to anyone who understood the distinction. Khabib had created something with genuine cultural value, a digital representation of a symbol that meant something deeply important to him and his community, and had sold it to willing buyers who knew exactly what they were purchasing. McGregor, on the other hand, had hyped a worthless cryptocurrency to his millions of followers and then simply watched as they lost their money when the inevitable collapse occurred. Yet here he was, unbelievably, positioning himself as the noble defender of scammed fans. Islam Makhachev, Khabib's protege and the current UFC lightweight champion, offered what was perhaps the most succinct and brutal analysis of the situation. Khabib broke his mind. He's not going to fight anymore. The contrast between the two men's trajectories since their 2018 collision could not have been more stark. Khabib had defended his title twice more against elite competition before retiring undefeated, following his father's tragic death, fulfilling a sacred promise he had made to his mother. He had then seamlessly transitioned into coaching and philanthropy, building an empire that extended far beyond the confines of the octagon. McGregor, meanwhile, had lost 3 of his last 4 fights. He had broken his leg in grotesque fashion during the Dustin Poirier trilogy, a horrifying moment that seemed to symbolize everything that had gone so wrong with his career since that fateful October night. He had accumulated a mountain of legal troubles that would have ended lesser careers. Controversies followed him around like a persistent, dark shadow. His attempt to transition into acting with the Roadhouse remake had generated mixed reviews at best. His business interests certainly produced income, but they did absolutely nothing to rehabilitate his shattered competitive reputation. The contrast with Khabib's path was painfully obvious. While McGregor descended further into controversy and decline, Khabib had ascended into a position of respected retirement, building institutions that will outlast his fighting career by decades. The rehabilitation centers in Dagestan represented real, tangible good in the world. People whose lives had been saved from the grip of addiction, families that were reunited, and communities that were strengthened. The Eagles MMA gym produced world-class fighters who carried forward the Nurmagomedov family tradition of excellence. And now, McGregor was attacking Khabib Nurmagomedov over the sale of digital hats, accusing him of scamming fans with a product that had delivered exactly what it promised to people who had willingly purchased it. This led to the question of the rematch that will never be and why it still matters so much. The question that hung over this entire November 2025 conflagration was one that had been asked countless times since October 6, 2018. Will Khabib Nurmagomedov ever fight Conor McGregor again inside the octagon? The answer, according to every available piece of evidence, remained a resounding no. Khabib has made it clear that the sheer preparation time makes a comeback highly unlikely. The months of grueling, soul-crushing training required to return to elite-level competition after years away, regaining the cardio, the timing, the ability to absorb punishment that competitive MMA demands would be absolutely substantial. His commitment to his mother not to fight again is sacred and inviolable, a promise made to a grieving woman in her moment of greatest loss. His current work as a coach and a businessman fulfills him in ways that competition never could, allowing him to shape careers while building something lasting and meaningful. And let's be honest, he has nothing left to prove, least of all to a man he already defeated as comprehensively as any fighter has ever been defeated in a championship bout. But the discourse persisted, because the hatred persisted, and the hatred persisted, because neither man seemed capable of releasing the other from the grip of his contempt. The deep psychological wounds inflicted before, during, and after UFC 22 had proven impossible to heal for either party. To truly understand why this rivalry remains so combustible 7 years after its apparent conclusion, you have to understand the depth of the wounds inflicted in the lead-up to UFC. At the UFC 23 Media Day in April 2018, McGregor and his crew ambushed a bus with Khabib inside, smashing windows and injuring other fighters. McGregor faced felony charges that were eventually pleaded down. The promotional campaign that followed featured McGregor attacking everything Khabib held dear: his religion, calling him a backward Soviet, making crude implications about gymnasium activities, and targeting his wife and his father Abdulman. Khabib's response, "I'll kill you," was not promotional hyperbole. It was genuine hostility from a man pushed far beyond his considerable capacity for patience. The fight itself provided Khabib with everything he wanted. Round by round, he systematically dismantled McGregor's mystique with relentless takedowns and brutal ground and pound. Yes, McGregor had his moments. He rocked Khabib early in the first round with a punch that might have finished a lesser man. He landed significant strikes in the second when he managed to keep the fight standing. But the overall trajectory of the fight was never genuinely in doubt to anyone watching with educated eye. Dagestani's wrestling superiority was just too complete. His conditioning too superior, his will too indomitable for McGregor to overcome, no matter what adjustments he attempted. What made that defeat so psychologically devastating for McGregor was not merely the physical domination, it was the complete and utter failure of his psychological warfare tactics that had worked so effectively against every single one of his previous opponents. Jose Aldo had been rattled into abandoning his game plan and getting knocked out in third. Eddie Alvarez had looked lost from the opening bell, but Khabib had shown absolutely nothing. He absorbed every single insult with stoic, unnerving calm, and then methodically destroyed McGregor inside the cage. Khabib later called it "my vacation," pure joy smashing a hated rival legally. McGregor said, "Humble me. I'm not humbled," but his career trajectory since that night has suggested otherwise.